Intervention Strategies for School-Based Physical Therapists. And my name is Andy Ruff, and a little introduction about myself. I grew up in New Jersey. I did my undergraduate work in Pennsylvania at Dickinson College. I did my PT work at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. I currently live in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I've been a school-based and early intervention PT for over 30 years, and I'm the lead physical therapist for the Iowa Department of Education. There's a recent picture of my family done at Christmas time. My oldest daughter there's at the right. She's got her doctorate in biomedical engineering from Wash U and just got back from presenting in Mumbai, India. And then she went straight from there to present in San Diego. She's doing research on triggers for Huntington's disease. The middle daughter there is a senior in high school this year, so she's trying to decide where she's going in the upcoming year. The daughter with the blonde hair, she's my performing artist. She spent 7 years traveling the world and performing in Europe and Asia and just about everywhere in the world. She's back now and getting her master's degree in early childhood development. My wife works in special education, and then, of course, myself. So I consider myself a blue-collar futurist. My professional training, like everybody that's a physical therapist, there's a background in anatomy, physiology, neuroscience, biomechanics, and rehabilitation. And anybody who's working in school-based practice also have an understanding of child development, social psychology, education, and most importantly, communication. I definitely believe in interdisciplinary collaborative work, especially with the children that we work with. I look at lifelong, as my work is a lifelong learning process, and definitely into an open source culture. I like to share things, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this presentation today. My personal interests include family, community, social advocacy, and I've also coached the high school soccer team out here for 28 years. So keep myself a little bit busy, I think. I work for the Green Hills Area Education Agency. That's in the southwest corner of Iowa, where that little star is, and live right there in Council Bluffs where the arrow points. Our agency covers 17 counties and a population of about 250,000 people. It's 8,599 square miles, just our little corner there in southwest Iowa, which is bigger than 5 states. We have 48 school districts and 5 non-public accredited schools. Iowa is a birth to mandate state, so most of our therapists do work from birth to 21. We do early access, or we call it early access, early intervention, and school-based practice, most of us. And we are a non-categorical state, so you are either an eligible individual or you're not an eligible individual. And I noticed we had at least a couple people from Iowa on this presentation, so hopefully they can back me up here. But my idea as the lead therapist for Iowa is if we can build an open collaborative culture where people are inspired by and are working towards common goals, then amazing things can and will happen. And I think as we go through this presentation, I think you're going to see that we have some pretty amazing things happening in Iowa. And I hope you guys will appreciate that. Unlike this oversized penguin on this ice float right here, there are no conflicts of interest in this presentation. But as far as full disclosure, I am a member of the APTA, a member of the Academy of Pediatric Physical Therapy, and a member of the School-Based Special Interest Group. And the School-Based Special Interest Group is the one that's supporting this project. This is the third of 3 free webinars that are being presented nationwide. It's the last of the 3 of the free ones that will be presented. And we'll talk at the end about some of the upcoming webinars that are coming that will only be available if you are a member of the school-based special interest group. So hopefully, if you're not a member, and after listening here today, you might want to become a member. A little commercial here. The school-based special interest group does provide a 2-day conference each year. This year, the conference is in Richardson, Texas on July 24th and 25th. The conference is a 2-day conference, and it's specifically designed for people practicing in school-based practice. There are 2 strands, one for those who are brand new to school-based practice, and another second strand for those people that have practiced in school-based practice for a while. I attended this conference for the first time last year when it was in St. Louis, and as somebody who's practiced for 30 years, I found the conference fabulous. I mean, they have great presenters, they have great resources, and definite passion for what we're doing in school-based practice. So if you have a chance to ever attend this, if it gets to your area of the country, I highly recommend that you take part in this. For today, we have, I think I narrowed it down to like 4 main objectives. We're going to look at school-based physical.
You are in the meeting now. There are more than 180 participants in the meeting. The meeting is being recorded. The meeting is recorded.
I have no idea what that is. I have no idea. We're supposed to be muted here, so I have no idea what that was. School-based physical therapy interventions supported by research. We're going to look at the amount of practice required. We're going to look at facilitated by students with multiple disabilities and the basic of adult learning. Hold on just a second. I have no idea why we're getting these interruptions here. I'm going to start here with a little video.
Now you can go.
Of a young man that I worked with. He has a pretty significant medical history. He has triplegia.
Okay, and then turn around and come down and concentrate. Excellent job.
One of the things you're going to hear a lot about today is goal-directed training. This is a young man. He's in 3rd grade when this video was taken. He was adopted. He has, I think, 7 siblings. They all rode the bus. And this young man was picked up because he couldn't get on and off the bus independently and safely. He was picked up in a van, and he rode to school basically by himself in the van while his brothers and sisters rode in the school bus. So he wanted to ride in the school bus with his brothers and sisters. His parents wanted him to ride in the school bus. The school was interested in him riding in a school bus. So we definitely had a goal direction and something we wanted to work on with him. Then we're also going to talk a lot about context-focused therapy. And that's where you change the environment a little bit. And in this case, we have a young man with, like I said, triplegia. His involvement is in his left arm. So he can't, even with as much practice as we tried, could not safely or functionally use that left arm to hold the rail to go up the bus steps. And in Iowa, buses are required to have 1 handrail only by law, but they have to have 1 handrail, and usually it is on the left side as you're going up the steps. But buses, as we found out as we further investigate this, are all designed so that you can add a second handrail on the opposite side to the buses. And somebody asked me a little bit about this after the last webinar, and I actually talked to our transportation specialist at the state level, And they said, you know, that there are no specific handrails for the other side, that each bus is produced differently. So you just have to approach whoever the bus manufacturer is, and they should have a rail designed for that opposite side. So, you know, when we added the second rail to the steps of this bus, it made it possible for this young man to get up and down. So there's context focused therapy. You're not changing anything about the individual, you're changing the environment that the individual is working in. And then this is kind of the mantra since I first read this article by Schmidt and Weisberg back in 2000. It's kind of become my mantra to practice is that practice of functional activity is the most important learning variable for the children that we work with. And so whatever I'm doing in terms of practice and intervention is focused on the functional activity that's important to that child. So here's an article that, if you haven't read this already, and if you don't read any other article that's going to be presented in this presentation today, it's one that I highly recommend that you do read, because first of all, it's an easy read for a research article. And second of all, it really will get you thinking about what we're doing and why we're doing some of the things we're doing in terms of interventions for the students we're working with. And some of the quotes from this that I took were, traditional views of childhood disability have been influenced very strongly by approaches taught and practiced in biomedicine. And I'm definitely one of those people. I mean, obviously, as coming out of physical therapy at school 30 some years ago, we were very focused on, you know, the child's body and what we could do or not do to work on that body. And again, was very, I was evident of this too. I mean, in this way of thinking, we work towards fixing children with disabilities. And I can't tell you how many kids that when I first started practice that we would pull out of class and do stretching programs and things like that, thinking that we were making a difference in them. And then, you know, the other quote in here is that there are often at best limited connections between changes in how the body works and the functional outcomes of those changes. And this is evident by some of the research that we have that's coming up here. I mean, this is some of the effectiveness of stretching for treatment and prevention of contractures. And this was a systematic review of 26 studies, and their conclusion was that regular stretching does not produce clinically important changes in joint mobility, pain, spasticity, or activity limitations in people with neurologic conditions. And I mean, I'll tell a story later of a young man who I used to pull out of recess, and we did a stretching program on him every day when really he needed to be out there at recess practicing some of the things he was doing. So obviously when I began my practice, I wasn't the best practitioner. And then another article about this one came out in 2016 about the effectiveness of interventions, stretching interventions with neurologic disabilities. And again, they looked at 16 different studies, and their conclusion was there's inconclusive evidence to support stretching interventions for preventing contractures or impacting a child's ability or a child's activity and participation level. So an activity and participation level are what we are hopefully focused on in our interventions. So what do we focus on according to the F words in childhood disabilities? I mean, the number one F word they have is function. You know, what is it that the child needs to do? In the case of that video we just showed you, it was getting on and off the bus so that he could ride with his peers and his family. And family is the second one of those F's is focus on. That's the essential environment for all children. So if he's got 6 brothers and sisters that are riding the bus and he's riding in a van by himself, obviously he wants to ride in the bus with them. Looking at fitness as a focus to our interventions. We know that our children are less active than typical children. So we need to look at health promoting orientation for these children that we're working with in the schools. And then looking at how they can engage with friends. I mean, this is the essence of social development. They can't be isolated. We want our kids, to be invited to birthday parties, to be, to be active and engaged in the activities that other kids are involved in. We want them to be able to focus on what's fun. What is it they want to do, not just what they have to do. And finally, looking at the future. And this should be the focus of everything we do is what are we going to do to prepare all of our children, for basically even in kindergarten, looking at where do we want them post-graduation. And if we look at the International Classification of Functioning of Disability and Health, and we look at the chart that's evolved over time, we see, to the far left, the body function and structures, and that's, when I first started my practice, that's where a lot of my focus was. Then it shifted towards activities. I wanted the child to walk or move or use the wheelchair, but then we didn't want them just to walk. We wanted them to walk to participate. So educational and developmental goals then focused on participation. What is it we wanted them to be able to achieve? And likewise, that was, in reverse, we wanted them to participate as part of those goals that we were developing. And ultimately, what we want to do is have this vision of a responsible, happy, and healthy citizen upon graduation with the capabilities, the competence, and the ability to adjust to the challenges of a society and the challenges of a changing society. So that's where our focus in interventions needs to be, is looking at what we can do to make our students more participatory. Another excellent article to read is Supporting Young Children with Multiple Disabilities. What do we know and what do we still need to know? This came out in 2012. It talks about looking at a whole child approach. So as we're working with the children, we need to be looking at 4 areas of need. Obviously, a lot of our kids that we work with as physical therapists have some kind of medical condition that can affect their physical performance, which in turn can impact learning and their social emotional status. So as we're working with kids and we're looking at the interventions and the things that we're working with, and we'll get more in depth into some of these interventions later, but this is the focus. I mean, we are the members of the team that particularly have the most knowledge of some of the medical aspects of a child, some of the physical aspects of that child. We can, the teachers can look at some of the learning and what needs to be done in terms of curriculum and what they're focusing on in the class. And everybody that's on the team should be looking at the social emotional component of that child. Looking at these children and working with them in natural environments. We don't pull children out to go to a physical therapy room. We try to work with them in the places that they're doing the activities that they need to work on. And this means that we need to have some flexibility in the interventions that we're providing. We can't be locked into the same time, at the same time on the same day every week, because the children will probably be doing the same thing, and that's not what we don't need to see them doing the same thing every day. We need to see them at recess. We need to see them at lunch. We need to see them when they restroom. We need to see when they're transitioning down the hall. We need to see them when they're transitioning within the classroom, and focus our interventions on those activities that are impacting their ability to participate and engage. And particularly with our children, there are unique areas of consideration. A lot of our kids are multiply involved. So we need to look at giving them an opportunity of self-determination. We need to look at making sure that they have a way of communicating, because eventually we want them, if we're looking at them, graduating, we want them to be able to self-advocate and speak for themselves. And Then obviously we want them to have self-directed movement. So looking at ways in which they can independently maneuver around. Here is one of the young high school men that I have worked with.
I need to go to the boys' room.
You better get down there. Here we go.
You didn't hear him. He said he needs to go to the boys' room. And most of our communication devices are got.
My chest brace on.
Need your chest brace off?
Needs his chest brace off, so he's able to communicate that.
I sure will. I'll get your chest brace off.
Please.
Here we go. And we'll help you with the door. And what do you got to remember to do when we get in there? Come on. Rather sit out here. Oh, you're Mr. Strong. I didn't need to help you. Come on in.
So the door to the restroom isn't accessible, but the rest of the restroom is
When I
accessible
hear
to
you
him.
flush, I'll be in to check on you.
And he's able to do his restrooming independently.
He's not going to film me going to the bathroom. Go ahead and go.
No.
So he's able to do all that independently, which is going to obviously help him in the future. He comes out.
Okay, we got recycling today.
He knows he's being
My
filmed.
chest brace on.
Okay. And where are you going? Where are you headed to?
You're going to see a couple videos of this young man through the course of this presentation. His teacher is exceptional in terms of making him be.
I need to go down the elevator.
Good. What would you need help with?
I mean, obviously the teacher knows the answers to all of these questions.
Would you help me with the door?
I sure would. Thank you.
The only trouble, again, it seems like a lot of the
You gonna let
kids
her
that I
ride with
picked,
you?
a lot of the kids I picked out for the videos that I have
Can
in
she ride
this
with you?
webinar all seem to be triplegics. And he's another one, so it's hard when he's driving his wheelchair to be able to use his communication device to answer. But as you watch this video, you know, as we look at those unique areas of consideration, self-determination. He's the one who told the teacher he needed to go to the restroom. Obviously, he could communicate that. He needed the chest brace off. He could communicate that. He needs help with the door. He's able to communicate that. He needed help with the chest brace back on and getting himself ready. And obviously, with a power wheelchair, he's got the ability to do some self-directed movement. Like I said, we're going to see 2 more videos of this young man doing different things throughout his day. But these are the things we want to focus on with him, is making him independent so that he can do the things he needs to do both as a student and after he graduates. Here's another young man. This young man has severe dystonia, but he's an amazing young man. I started working with him in early access.
I know, very good. I like that, but I want you to just tell him on here.
My name is Casey.
Thank you, Casey.
His name is Casey. He's named after Casey Kane, the race car driver, and I'll give you a little story about that. Here he's at the nurse, and again, he's asking for help with his medications.
Very good.
The volume wasn't turned up very well there. The volume.
Saturday was Popcorn Blitz Day, and I sold $600 worth of popcorn.
All right, did you hear what he shared? It was Boy Scout popcorn.
It was Popcorn Blitz Day, and I sold $600 worth of popcorn.
Obviously, the volume was turned up there.
Tell them thank you.
But he's a young man that I met in early access when he was really young. And he couldn't roll over. He's, like I said, he has significant dystonia, but his family is really into NASCAR race car driving. And when I went to visit him in December, they had a Christmas tree set up and he wasn't even a year old at the time. And they had a slot car, race car track around the wheelchair, around the Christmas tree. And he was laying on his stomach and using his left arm on the remote remote control, was racing his mom around the racetrack, and he actually won the race. And as I was looking at him, I thought, here's a kid that's perfect for power mobility. I mean, he couldn't sit up by himself, he couldn't roll over, he couldn't do any of those things, but obviously he was a bright young man. So he then became the poster child for Children's Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, because he was the youngest child they ever put in power mobility, and they filmed him for the news station. On that very first day he got his power wheelchair, they took him to the Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha, which is the #1 ranked zoo in the world, and he just had a field day moving around the zoo. So again, we're looking at those unique areas of consideration for a child who's multiply involved, and providing him a way of self-determination, providing him a way of communication, and providing him some self-directed movement. So those are all extremely important for these young men here. And here's a young lady who is in high school, and again, very involved.
That would make more sense. Yes, that would make more sense.
One of the things in Iowa is we build our schools. And you can see there are some stairs in the background of this school because it's built off an older building. But many of our schools are built out and instead of up. So in this particular school, the high school, the middle school, and the elementary school are all different wings of the same building. So she's right now over in the elementary wing of the building. The kindergarten class is out at
your left hand worked pretty good.
And she is going to be delivering their snacks to them while they're out at recess. And she's got all of the different kindergarten classes that she'll be delivering to, and it's just part of one of her chores. So what have we created here? We put her in a natural environment, obviously the school. We've given her a functional activity. She's using her power wheelchair, and we've provided some adaptations and modifications so that she can complete the skills that she's doing. And obviously she's a participant, which is what we want. She's got some responsibility as she delivers milk every day to the different kindergarten classrooms. And all of this is designed to give her some practice so that we can prepare her for doing some postgraduate, getting her ready for that post-graduation readiness, and providing her with some skills that she could use and that she'd have confidence in as she graduates eventually from high school. So another part of that supporting children with multiple disabilities is talking about collaborative practice. As we look at collaborative practice, we're looking at it's the most effective approach is to call on the collective knowledge and expertise for the various team members that they bring to the educational planning process. Those people that are from Iowa and some of the ones that are in the leadership program, I mean, they've heard me say very often that the room is always smarter than any one individual. So you need to take advantage of all of that knowledge that's in the room. And each team member brings a unique set of skills and experiences to the teaming relationship. Individual team members acquired shared understanding and knowledge of each other's expertise through collaboration. And a critical aspect, and we're going to talk more about this later on here, a critical aspect of effective collaboration in the educational program is involvement of family members and forming partnerships with families. too often, it even happens in my practice that the only time I see the parents is maybe during conferences, if either of us is able to attend the conferences, or sometimes it's only at the IEP, which happens once a year. Being from Iowa, and being that we are a birth to 21 mandate state, often I've been working with these children when they were young and before they went in school. So oftentimes I do have a good rapport with the families, and that rapport doesn't end when they go to school. So we do a lot of collaborative effort with families. And like I said, I'm going to show you a little chart about why that's important here later. But here's just an example of that's, or the arrow is there to say how critical that is as far as working with families. But here's just, I just took a picture of this because this was the young man that you saw coming off the bus at the very first video. This was when he was in kindergarten, and the lady to the left there was his kindergarten teacher, and she was afraid because Jedediah was falling a lot in the kindergarten classroom and over the course of the kindergarten day. So we brought the whole team together, and the lady that's on the computer and taking notes, that's the school psychologist, who is also our building rep, as we are an area education agency. So we provide supports to a lot of the schools. And then the OT and myself were there, and we looked at some of the causes for Jedediah's falls, and then we came up with some ideas that we could work on his balance and some. So I mean, we did this over part of the lunch break. We looked at setting up some warm-up activities that he could do to work on balance during his PE classes. I was going to do standardized balance testing with him that then we could perform on him quarterly, changes in some of his balance over time. We were going to work on raising his awareness, looking at classroom chairs. And what we did is looked at that. We looked at the collective knowledge and the expertise of all the people that were on the team. We brought their unique set of skills and experiences together, developed a shared understanding of what the problem and concern was, formed a partnership in how we were going to engage and work with this young man to improve his school environment. So here is Jedediah, and this is during his kindergarten class.
Look at that smile. I love it.
I mean, probably has a body mass twice most of his kindergarten classmates. He always has a smile on his face. Here was one of the changes we made. So he struggled to get on and off the floor when they were doing some group activities on the floor. So we provided him with a chair, and that chair was next to the bookshelf so that he could use the bookshelf to help guide him as he sat on the chair. And he quickly learned how to adapt to that. Another thing we provided, and one thing we do have is we have a nice resource center for equipment. So we provided him with a trainer that he could use when he was out at recess, where a lot of his falls did happen. With the gait trainer, he was still able to engage with his classmates, and these girls weren't playing with him just because he was being videotaped. They actually were pretty typical of his playground activity. None of them are very good football players. So we started to look at, obviously, looking at his independence, looking at his ability to participate with his classmates in his class.
What are you doing this weekend?
Looking at his engagement with his classmates.
You're going camping. Where are you going camping?
Little Sue.
At Little Sioux?
Little Sioux's a campground right along the Missouri River.
Tent, or what are you going to camp in?
I'm a camper.
You have a camper?
Yes.
Would you like to go camping?
Yes.
Is that one of your favorite activities?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I want to ask.
So here, and it's all done by providing him with a much safer environment than he came with when he entered kindergarten here. So, I mean, those were some of our interventions for him and done collaboratively. And as I was talking about before, the importance of doing something collaboratively is if we're looking at working on any skill, and actually I created this pie chart for one of our speech pathologists because she was a little frustrated because they were using the person's speech device only during feeding lunchtime. So typically in Iowa, our students come for there's 180 days of school each year. So if all you're using the device for is 1 hour a day for 180 days, you know, that's 180 hours of practice while they're at school. They're at school 7.5 hours a day. So if you add that additional time, and if you would integrate the use of that communication device, you get another 990 hours of practice time. But if you look at the total number of waking hours, and if you look at 14 times 365 days, you know, that's 5,110 hours. So there are 3,940 hours of practice opportunities outside of school. And we need to be able to take advantage of those and work with families so that the same goals that we're working on at school and the same interventions we're providing at school are interventions and goals that are meaningful to the family and are things that they want to follow up on at home too, because that's obviously a lot of time where we can include practice in the kind of activities and interventions that we're working on to make somebody more independent in terms of their participation or their engagement. So collaboration to me is essential. Like I said, in Iowa, I think we have the best of all worlds because we are a birth to 21 mandate state. So a lot of times we've developed the rapport with these families early when the children are still in the early intervention process. So here's just, and you guys will all get if you sign up and you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation and you'll get a certificate of attendance that you may or may not be able to use for CEUs depending on your state, but you'll have access to some of these resources too. So here are just some resources when it comes to looking at enhancing home and community engagement with schools. There's 5 articles right here that you can look at and look up, but obviously in 2 hours we don't have enough time to go over each of these. What we want to do is get into some of the interventions themselves. So here's a systematic review of interventions of children with cerebral palsy, the state of the evidence. And I don't know, this is kind of, this came out in 2013. Iona Novak and a bunch of people that she worked with out of Australia did, I mean, they looked at this article itself has 216 references to it. So they did some extensive research into what was out there looking at interventions and the effect that it had on students with cerebral palsy. And obviously not all of our students have cerebral palsy, but you can extrapolate some of what their conclusions are for some of the students that we are working with, the additional students that we're working with that obviously don't have a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. They looked at 166 research articles, 74% which were systematic reviews. They looked at 64 discrete interventions and looked at a bunch of different outcomes, and some of those outcomes looked at spasticity management, contracture management, improvement of muscle strength, improvement of motor activity, improvement of function and self-care, some of the things that, improvement of communication, mealtime management, some of the things that definitely would be things that would be important for us in school-based practice. And they came to the outcomes they assessed. They found 16% of the interventions were interventions that were graded good or do it, and the green ones are those that they graded do it, that there was research to support them. There were 58% of the interventions were probably do it, that there was research that supported it, but maybe it wasn't as significant as some of that 16% that were definitely do it. Then there were 20% of those interventions that were probably don't do it because there really wasn't research to support it. And there were 6% that said definitely don't do these. And those 6%, 8 out of the 131 outcomes or interventions that they looked at included craniosacral therapy, hip bracing, hyperbaric oxygen, NDT, which is something I was trained in, and sensory integration. So those were things that they found no proof of. Now, when their article came out, it was the talk of the research community because of the extent. And this little cartoon, I think, captures this. Notice all of the computations, theoretical scribbling, and lab equipment norm. Yes, curiosity really did kill these cats. And the thing that Iona Novak and her team got, mainly because of those 8 that were in the red category, they started to get death threats for their research, which is something you don't typically see when somebody's researching something that, the research team is getting death threats. But when you get death threats and you're Iona Novak, what do? You come out a year later and you publish a follow-up article. So here she publishes an article in 2014 where she's looking at, evidence-based diagnosis and healthcare and rehabilitation in children with cerebral palsy, and looking at what interventions have the most evidence-supported results. And she did a bubble graph and a bubble infograph of these. And her article, this is another one of those articles, if you get a chance to read it, if you haven't read it already, I highly recommend that you read this because she makes it very interesting. She uses a bunch of infographics, which is something that I enjoy looking at. One of her first infographics are some of the comorbidities that you find in children with or people with cerebral palsy. And she looked at 3 out of 4 have some level of pain. 1 out of 2 have an intellectual disability. 1 out of 3 is non-ambulant. 1 out of 4 is nonverbal. And some of those things that you might find in addition to the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. I think she did some interesting, some extensive research to come up with some of these findings. And then she looked at some of the topography and the severity of cerebral palsy by type. So if you look at the children that were students that we work that have hemiplegia, if you look at them, 99% of them are in the GMFCS level of 1 to 3, and only 1% of hemiplegias are in the 4 or 5 GMFCS level. So we can expect that a child with hemiplegia, for the most part, 99% of those children will be able to walk. Obviously some with some kind of assistive device, but that would be something that we'd hopefully set as a goal for those children, and some interventions we might work on. You look at diplegia. Again, 98% of those children with diplegia fall under that levels 1 to 3. Only 2% fall under levels 4 and 5. So again, you'd hope that most of the students that we work with that are truly diplegic would be able to ambulate fairly independently. And then the opposite is true for those with quadriplegic involvement. If you look at these, only about a quarter of these are in that GMFCS level 1 to 3, and 75% of them, whether they're spastic, dyskinetic, or ataxic, are almost 3 out of 4 are in the level 4 and 5. So there we're going to look at equipment that we can use to assist them. And you're going to see that when we look at, here's one of the bubble graphs that she did. So here's some effective interventions, and these were the green interventions that they found for children with hemiplegia. And if you look at these, I particularly focus on the whole person, we see fitness training is something that there's support for. Goal-directed training, which is something we talked about previously, there's support for. Home programming, the importance of that collaboration between home and school, and context-focused therapy. So, and then there are other ones that we probably wouldn't be doing. I mean, we're not doing Botox injections for spasticity management for arms or legs in school. The OTs may be working on some manual training, and maybe we're doing some of that at school, or some constraint-induced manual therapy, but mostly, I mean, a lot of that is going to be done by the OTs. So we're looking at 4 things that we could focus on: fitness training, goal-directed training, home programming, and contact-focused therapy. If we look at diplegics, again, we're not worried about interventions for the arm because they're not involved in the arm, but we're looking at the whole body. Again, support for fitness training, again, goal-directed training, home programming, and context-focused therapy. So those are some of the things, again, that we might look at school to develop our interventions around. And then as we get into the quadriplegic involved child, again, you've got goal-directed training, you've got home programming, and context-focused therapy. The only one they don't have in this is the fitness. There was no evidence for the fitness training for these children. So again, some of the things that are also in the green are things that we probably are not doing, like I said, the Botox. I mean, we're not doing probably casting at school. We can do some hip surveillance to monitor the hip placement and things like that, and that would be part of our practice at school. So as we're looking at goal-directed training, what does that mean? Here's an excellent article if you want to read something about goal-directed training, just some excerpts from that. Goal-directed training is an activity-based approach to therapy. Meaningful team-selected goals are used to provide opportunities for problem solving and to indirectly drive the movement required to successfully meet the task's demands. And this is in contrast to interventions that are focusing on body function. So here's a young lady that I work with at one of my elementary schools. She has spina bifida, and she's another one where we worked on getting on and off the bus because she wasn't able to get on and off the bus, so she had to ride in the bus in a wheelchair, and so they had to provide a wheelchair accessible bus for her because she couldn't get on and off the bus. Again, we practiced getting on and off the bus, and as you can see here.
Okay, you can go.
Again, she has spina bifida, so she's got some weaker lower extremities. So she needs the 2 rails so she can pull herself up on. So with the 2 rails, she's able to get up the bus and on the bus. Guarding her a little bit more closely as she gets up down off the bus. She's able to do it all by herself. And that way she doesn't have to use doesn't have to have a special bus to pick her up, and doesn't have to ride in a wheelchair, which then got parked in the corner of the classroom when she got there because she was expected to walk during the day. And the wheelchair was available and still available if she's going on outings or for activities that require more endurance, because obviously she's not going to the zoo, which is one of an outing that's pretty frequently used by our elementary schools, and be able to walk the zoo by herself all day. So here's the young man that we saw earlier.
We're going to see how fast you can do this.
One of the things we set as a goal for him is to be able to get himself off the floor and back into his wheelchair, because unfortunately his mom walked out on his family, and his dad works 2 jobs and often doesn't get home till late at night. So when he leaves school, he goes home, he goes to his grandmother's, who takes care of him, but his grandmother is in her 80s. She's not able to lift and manage him. So our goal for him over the course of this year that we worked on this, after the dad explained the situation, and the grandmother was also there at the staffing, was to look at what we could do to help them out, help him out, not just at school, but also at home. His ability to get in and out of his own wheelchair, get himself so that he can get himself buckled up and ready to go was important to them. So here he's obviously practicing. We have a nice weight room in his school that has the mats down, so it's a good place for him to practice getting out of his chair, and a good place for him to practice getting back up in his chair. Our goal for him was for him to be able to do this in less than 2.5 minutes. That includes buckling the seatbelt. It's got a little bit too tight for him, so he does need a little bit of help right here to loosen the seatbelt so he can device position so that it can actually use it. And he's done.
2 minutes and 7 seconds.
We were going for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. He did it in 2 minutes and 7 seconds. He reached his goal for that particular outcome. So goal-directed training is aimed to change the performance by targeting the tasks to be achieved rather than the impairments thought to limit the performance. So we're working on him obviously getting into the wheelchair. The essential elements include collaborative goal selection. This was something that was important to both the home and the school. Analysis of the task, engagement of the client as an active problem solver, and undertaking repetitive practice with structured feedback. Like I said, he has a super teacher who's there to both support him and coach him and give him the feedback that he needs in order to do the performance he did. The goal-directed approach is individualized and suitable to individuals with a range of physical and cognitive disabilities. And it's a very easy one to use the goal attainment scale on to kind of conceptualize the goal-directed training and evaluating the intervention outcomes. So that's a little bit about goal-directed training. I'm sure all of you guys are doing this in your practice with students that you're working with, looking at targeting tasks and what do they need to do to perform those tasks. And then if we're looking at context-focused therapy, and this lady in the blue is actually my wife, and this is at one of the high schools that I serve, and she works in the special ed department there. She's working with a young lady who, again, is got triplegic cerebral palsy. Seems like a lot of the kids that I've used here have triplegic cerebral palsy, but she's also significantly visually impaired, so that, I mean, she's actually considered functionally blind. So context-focused therapy, again, a great article to read if you want to read more about a new intervention approach for children with cerebral palsy. And it's basically, it's a unique aspect of the context therapy approach is that the therapists are trained to change only the characteristics of the task and or the environment. So it's like adding that second rail to the school bus. You're changing the task and the environment. You're not changing the child's impairment. In this case, the video shows her going up the stairs, and she can do that, but my wife helps her out here as she goes up the stairs one at a time, and she is in an old elementary school.
A little help, Dominique, you do very well.
And her classes are on 3 different floors. And with her visual impairment, without my wife taking her arm, she would struggle to go up the stairs. So what's the thing we taught her to do? I mean, as she, you know, as she's here in the high school, she has classes on 3 different floors. We actually worked on teaching her to use the elevator because there's elevator access to all of her floors and classrooms. And so even with her, I mean, actually working with the mobility and orientation vision person, we worked collaboratively to help her get all around the building independently, so she doesn't have to have my wife holding her hand as she goes up, and even more importantly, as she came down the stairs, because that's where she was a lot less safe. Anybody who's ever participated in Go Baby Go, the Cole Galloway project that he does out of the at least did out of the University of Delaware. I mean, it's basically focused on this context-focused therapy, because what he does is he provides mobility devices for young children, and this would be in the I think it's 9 months to 5 years that he focuses on, and he provides mobility devices for them so they can go out and explore their environment. And my youngest daughter, the one who's a senior, and I took place in one of their chapter events in September of this last year. And they gather, they look for how many chairs or how many mobility devices they're going to need, and then they invite people from the engineering program at the university. They have PTs from obviously the PT program at the university. They have OT students there. They actually have some of the professional engineers from like OPPD to come in and help manufacture or help modify these vehicles for these children. That's my daughter right there putting the adapted control and steering wheel on, and she did this for 14 different devices, and giving the children something to steer. This is one of the families that I work with. This is a young man who was just about a year at the time this photo was taken, and he'd had 3 brain operations for brain tumors, and this was his first. I mean, he was not a student, he's not a child that could roll over or sit up, but he was somebody that could actually activate the car. And when he brought it home, his older sister wanted one too, so that she could race him. And then this young lady right here at the top is one of the young ladies that I work with in early access, and she has spinal muscular atrophy. So if you worked with somebody with spinal muscular atrophy, obviously they struggle to sit up, they struggle to roll over, they struggle to stand up and move. There is some amazing research that's happening with spinal muscular atrophy, especially with drugs like Spinraza, which this young lady is on. So she's 2 years old and she is able to sit up. She's not able to stand. I mean, she does stand. We have a stander for her, and we do have a gait trainer for her that she's actually starting to move now and using her legs a little bit. But this was the first time that she had a chance to actually move herself without any assistance. So her dad's going to help her a little bit because obviously she doesn't understand steering just yet. This was taken right out of the event, was in the building that we just passed, and we just took her out to the parking lot so we could videotape her a little bit as she was moving around, and she did amazing. The next time I went to visit her at her house, we took her out on their driveway and had her driving around. And when we brought her in from that visit, she threw a huge tantrum, and her mom started crying because she said it was the first time she'd ever thrown a tantrum because she didn't want to get out of the mobility device. She wanted the chance to explore and be able to move herself. And so this provided that opportunity, because there's a lot of research that says, you know, how important it is for children to be able to move and explore, and for cognitive development, language development, social development for these young children and those children that don't have that opportunity. It's the reason Cole Galloway developed the whole Go Baby Go program, is to give them an opportunity to explore. And if there is anybody that's listening here, there's another event coming up in Omaha, Nebraska. It's going to be April 4th of this coming spring, in 2 months here. And they're accepting applications right now for children from 9 months to 5 years that might want to qualify for some kind of modified car. And they'll have the same, probably not the same exact group of people, but they'll invite the same types of people to develop the cars. And like I said, that one that we did back in September, we had 14 different children that were set up for cars. So here's another example of context-focused therapy. This is, again, that young lady that my wife works with. She is at the YMCA working on a work-study program. She needs to use an aerosol spray can to spray the towel that she's working with so that she can, or is to, in this case, at least this week, was to clean the restrooms. Now, because she's visually impaired, because she's got triplegic involvement and even involvement in her good arm, it was hard for her to take the aerosol spray bottle and know how to hold it just as a spray bottle, and use that to spray the towel that she needed. So we came up with a modification. This is a simple modification, a handle that snaps right on the aerosol can. You can pick it up basically at any local hardware store. It costs, this one costs $7.50. It just snaps right on to the aerosol can. When it snaps on, you snap it on so that, you know, in this case, this young lady knew exactly which direction the opening or the spray was. So just by holding the handle, she's able to use the spray. So it snaps right on. That's what it looks like on the aerosol spray. She's able to trigger it and point it so that she could use it. This is, again, a context-focused therapy, and it's a 20-second adaptation. I mean, you have to go get it, but obviously it's something simple. What I would love to do, and I don't know, I mean, I think I looked and we had like 140 people or something on this. I mean, at the end, I'm going to give you my email address, but I would love to kind of start collecting some of these simple modifications, you know, and adaptations that people are making that are this context-focused therapy. Because, I mean, if you don't know that there's, you know, a trigger device for an aerosol can like this, you wouldn't know to use that for somebody that you might be working with. And I think there are a lot of these kind of context-focused, you know, measures that we have out there that we're not, you know, that everybody's not going to be familiar with. Here's a cartoon that I thought was very interesting. Actually, this cartoon sits above my desk, so I see it every day. It's by Michael Giangreco. Not this last combined section meeting, but the year before that. He was one of the keynote speakers there. He's out of the University of Vermont. He's not a physical therapist, but he's kind of the godfather for inclusive education. So as you look at this cartoon, the young man in the wheelchair there says, can you please shovel off the ramp? And the custodian there says, all these kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I'll clear the ramp for you. And the young man in the wheelchair says, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in, which is obviously true. But something probably the custodian didn't even think about. That, here is again a context-focused therapy. I mean, you've provided a ramp so that this child or student in a wheelchair can get in and out of the building. And sometimes when we're looking at context-focused therapy, an intervention like shoveling off the ramp or even having a ramp available is also a means of advocacy for some of these students. I remember when we were looking at passing a school bond in one of our local districts, and I actually wrote an editorial to the local newspaper because the old building that they had was definitely built in multiple levels, and it wasn't one that was something you could put an elevator in so that children would have access to all levels. And I had a student in a wheelchair who in the middle of winter, and in Iowa it can get very cold in the middle of winter and snowy and icy, would have to leave his kindergarten classroom and go outside in order to get to the cafeteria, because that was the only way for him to access the cafeteria the way the building was set up. So we did get that bond issue passed, and a new school was built in the next year, and that wasn't an issue. But sometimes as we're looking at the interventions and the things that our children need, it is an avenue for advocacy for all children and adults too, because there's adults that are going to come to visit some of those students during conferences and activities that need access to those buildings also. Fitness training was another one of those practices that fell under the green. As we're looking at fitness training, here was a systematic review. They looked at 20 different studies of children and adolescents and young children with cerebral palsy. The increases in fitness levels obtained by exercise programs will only be maintained if the exercise programs are continued. It's just like the fitness level for any of us. We can get fit if we're doing our fitness routine, but as soon as we stop doing the fitness routine, we're going to lose the benefits of that fitness program. Children with physical disabilities are at risk for limited participation. I think we all know that. And only one study that out of the 20 studies that they reviewed talked anything about increased participation in school, leisure, social, or family activities after undertaking the exercise program. And I guess that was surprising to me, because I think that's the focus of many of us, that we want these kids participating, and not just participating at school, but participating outside of school in exercise activities too. So here's a young man. When can we work on exercise activities? Obviously at recess. And here's a young man. He's in the kindergarten schools that I work with. He was born and he was adopted at age 2. And when he was adopted into the family, he could not, at age 2, he couldn't roll over, couldn't sit up. He went to a terrific family who's adopted multiple different children with multiple impairments. They are really engaged and do nice follow-up. So here's just some opportunities for him during recess to work on obviously motor planning, stairs and steps, and he's got a para-educator who's with him to make sure that he stays safe, and he's got children that are actively engaged with him. He's working on all sorts of motor skills during the course and during the course of his recess. This is the time that I would see him, is during recess, and then we would look at how he was handling different challenges of all the different devices he wanted to go and attempt. And you can see him. The slide is, even though he's smiling, it's not something he's very comfortable on. But he's got a classmate there at the bottom who's encouraging him to get down, helping him as he gets off, although he's really capable of getting off by himself. And of course he goes right to another climbing apparatus with some spotting. He's able to figure it out. So we can work on a lot of motor planning with him, in a physical therapy session. But I mean, here, he's getting practice on a lot of things I would want him to work on, but he's doing it in a very natural environment. He's doing it with his peers, and he's participating, and he's got engagement both on his part and on his peers' part. So some of the research that's done on fitness training is that it can increase aerobic capacity. There were 2 systematic reviews and 2 controlled trials that showed that. The greater gains were made the longer the training program was used. So obviously, if we've got somebody at school, we've got at least 8 or 9 months where we can work on some of these programs, even if we're just using recess. And at least in Iowa, still in elementary schools, we still have a morning recess and an afternoon recess. So you have plenty of opportunity for them to work on some of their fitness training during these opportunities. Here's one of, another place where we can work on fitness training is during PE class. This is one of my favorite PE teachers. I think I could go all day long every day. He's got at least a child I have in almost every class he has, but he does such a great job adapting programs for them. And in this lady with cerebral palsy, but level 1, probably cerebral palsy, in a trach. She's in a kindergarten, maybe I think it's a first grade class. It's a garbage can activity. They all have to lay there with their heads down, their eyes closed. He takes 3 or 4 kids to go inside the garbage can, and they have to try to clean up the gym by throwing balls into the matted area there, which is the imaginary garbage can, while the people he's chosen are in the garbage can and they're throwing the garbage back out. So as you see here in a second, this has this young lady very engaged and participating. And obviously we need to work on some throwing skills, some strength, but she's right in there with her peers, taking part in the activity. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is an excellent PE teacher to work collaboratively with. He's so open to trying anything so that he can keep the kids engaged in the activities that he's got designed for that particular day. And again, if you look at some of the research, there really, there isn't a whole lot of support that the fitness training changes aerobic capacity. And the other thing you find in most of the research that was done, it's done in levels 1 and 2 GMFCS levels. I mean, there's some a small portion of GMFCS level 3, but very little research is done on fitness training in levels 3 through 5. And those are some of our quadriplegic involvement, and that's why you're not seeing the literature support for those students in terms of fitness training. Here's another young lady in same PE teacher, different class. This is a class that actually happens right after lunch. So he actually uses keeps the here you go, young lady who's in a wheelchair, working on hand coordination, throwing skills, using the table as a way to bounce. Her classmates are being introduced to ping pong skills, hitting ping pong skills. Obviously, just working on eye-hand coordination and ball skills is the level that this young lady's at. We tried her with a paddle and went back to just kind of working on her trying to catch and throw the ball to start with. As again was mentioned earlier, as with wider populations, fitness training must be ongoing and sustained. There was no study that examined long-term follow-up found that gains achieved from fitness training were maintained if the fitness training wasn't maintained. So if we want to have our kids active, we have to keep them active. And this is one of the things that, again, that where collaboration is so important with our children, because, we have them for those 1,000 or so hours, during those 180 days that we have them during the school year. But there is a lot of time where they're not in school, either on weekends, holidays, or during the summer, where they still need to be working on fitness training. So we need to be working on that. Here's some of the resources and research resources for fitness training. Again, you'll have access to this. The effects of fitness training, and here was a mega analysis looking at this as fitness training as it affects cognition. And elementary age children were found to reap largest benefit, cognitive benefit from physical activity. Children who are cognitively impaired or considered physically disabled appeared to benefit even more from physical activity than typically developing children. And even a single session of moderate physical activity will immediately boost brain function, cognition, and academic performance. So we do not want to take PE, we do not want to take recess and some of those opportunities for physical engagement out of these children's school opportunities. Just an infographic. Kids who are physically active, they're better academically, they have better attendance, they have better behavior. Just some of those things that you can look at. Children need at least an hour of physical activity a day, something that our children don't typically get. So we need to make sure that we're taking advantage of all of those opportunities for them to get physical activity that we possibly can. And promoting participation in children with disabilities in sports, recreation, and physical activities. Here was an article that was published in 2008, and it talked about that international efforts to promote participation in recreational sports. And this is outside of education, and physical fitness. Have been around since 1948. Some of the ones that we're familiar with are the Paralympics. I used this slide in the last presentation I did. The first Paralympic competition was held in, and you're supposed to be guessing this on the outside, and you can kind of guess if you weren't part of the last, if you weren't part of the presentation I did previously. But the first Paralympics was done in 1960. Special Olympics, something we're all familiar with too. Special Olympics was established in 1968. And even with some of these efforts, the Paralympics and Paralympic sports and Special Olympics, our children with disabilities still have lower levels of cardiorespiratory fitness, lower levels of muscular endurance, and higher rates of obesity than typical children. So we need to keep our kids active. Again, I'm lucky that I live and practice in Iowa. Iowa was the first state in the nation to incorporate wheelchair events in middle school and high school track and field competitions. And they did this back in 1991. So it's been going for almost 30 years now that we've included wheelchair events in high school and middle school track and field events. There are 18 other states that now offer these opportunities. If you're not one of these 19 states that are doing this, I suggest you maybe advocate for trying to do that. In 2012, Iowa became the first state to add a wheelchair category to their state cross-country championships, and that's where this picture was taken up above. I was actually honored to be at this state cross-country championship. I mean, I didn't know that it was the first time that there was going to be a wheelchair category, because I did not have anybody at that time participating in this, but I did have a daughter who was running at the state cross-country championships. So I got to witness this, and there were 5, they were all young men, and they ran in their wheelchairs, their modified wheelchairs, they ran the exact same course that the able-bodied men and women ran. And that was, they were supported by Adaptive Sports Iowa. And Adaptive Sports Iowa has made it a priority to connect with middle school and high school students with physical disabilities and provide them with the needed equipment so that they can compete in those track and field events. I mean, and that's a nice resource. I mean, there is Adaptive Sports USA, and there's Disabled Sports USA. I don't know if there's chapters in every state, but if they are an excellent resource. And we have a meeting once in the fall. We bring all of the people that might be involved in events and opportunities for adaptive sports from across the state of Iowa. And we meet for 2 days and look at ways that we can provide more opportunities for children and young adults to participate in activities. Here's just a quick video of some of the things that they do. As a soccer coach, I love the idea that they've got adaptive soccer.
I sit there and I think, how special is this, that somebody thought enough of our children to create this opportunity for them. It's unbelievable. To see him be able to participate, it's something I never thought I'd be able to see.
At the core of Adaptive Sports Iowa, that's what we're trying to do. After a while, you don't look at them as someone with a disability. I mean, they're just people out having a good time.
I've been vision impaired my whole life.
25 years ago, after a car wreck, I was paralyzed in my neck.
So Adaptive Iowa provides it at no cost. They provide racing wheelchairs for those students that request them. They provide field event wheelchairs, and they provide customized racing gloves, just to, as a few of the things that they do. Here's Josh Turek. Josh Turek was one of my students many, many years ago when I first started, when I was still working on some of the body function and impairment focus. Josh has spina bifida. He obviously is in a wheelchair. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about himself here.
Talk about how you got in to wheelchair basketball, the evolution to the elite level. Obviously, you've been around as long as anybody on the team currently. And then the Paralympic experience you had from the past 2 Paralympics.
Okay, so first how I got involved in...
Yeah, how you got involved in the...
How I got involved in basketball is I first attended a wheelchair sports camp for children in Omaha, Nebraska. And I had always been in an athlete family. Both my brother and sister played professional basketball, and we always played basketball. I just didn't know that there was an avenue to play it in the wheelchair. And immediately, as soon as I was in the chair, I was like, this is the sport for me. And from there, I played for a junior team out of Omaha, Nebraska, and then played my college basketball in Minnesota for Southwest Minnesota State University. And my senior year, there was a team there at the Final Four scouting from Italy, and asked me if I would be interested in playing overseas professionally. And so I went over there, and I've been playing professionally over in Europe ever since.
Talk about the Paralympic experience you had in Athens and again in London.
So the first one is always special. I was young. I was new to it. We took a really young team. I think that we were too young and too inexperienced. Ultimately, we had a good team, but we were hoping for a medal. The London experience was really an amazing experience. Every single game was completely sold out. We were in all the papers. All the newspapers had several pages each day about the Paralympics. I remember them telling me there in London that they built the 2 largest McDonald's in the world there on the actual grounds of the Olympic Center. And they told us that the 2 biggest days that they had of sales were not the Olympic days, they were actually Paralympic days. It was unbelievable. And to have 19,000 people, in the O2 Arena. I remember specifically that last game that we played to win the bronze medal, to play Great Britain in the O2 Arena, just packed. And, at the beginning of the game, have 19,000 people, because it's the largest arena in all of Europe, screaming, "God save the Queen." And to go and play them there in that environment, and to beat them and to come out with the bronze medal, up to this point, it has been the best athletic experience of my life.
So Josh was one of my students when I first started, and I mean, this is where I'm embarrassed to say that he was one of those young men that as a kindergartner, rather than sending him out at recess to play with his peers, we'd keep him in. And he had tight hamstrings and he had tight hip flexors, and we would get him out of his chair and we would stretch his hip flexors and his hamstrings. He's now 35 years old, and he still has tight hip flexors and tight hamstrings, but he's obviously a wheelchair basketball player. He's played professionally in Europe since 2005. He makes $250,000 a year playing basketball. He comes back to Council Bluffs pretty regularly. Actually, he's back here currently. So, I should have been out there at recess working with him on his wheelchair cutting and his basketball dribbling and some of those things, which would have been way more important to him as he got older than it was to worry about tight hamstrings and tight hip flexors. So here's something else if you're not familiar with it. The great bikegiveaway.com. They're going right now. They're registering and voting, and they give adapted bikes away. This is nationwide, so it's not something that's just happening in Iowa or the Omaha area. And here's a quick joke, just wonderful. So much for instilling a sense of awe with some of the things that I've shown you so far. But we're going to get back into now looking at some of the ones that are probably due, again, out of the Iona Novak research article that we talked about previously. These are some of the ones, again, for hemiplegia. We look at some of the ones that are the whole body strength training, some of the ones that look at legs or orthotics, some of the ones that, early intervention for the whole body, and some assistive technology in the hemiplegia case, because most of, like we said, 99% of these people are walking. Some of the assistive technology is used for the handwriting or computer access. As we look at interventions for the diplegic, again, there's strength training. Again, there's orthotics. Again, there's early intervention. And again, here's assistive technology, and in this case, it's standing frames and standing opportunities for these children that are diplegic, and then also assistive technology for walking aids, and we're going to talk about some of these things in just a little bit. When you look at the quadriplegic involved students, again, you're looking at orthotics and early intervention and assistive technology for wheelchairs and assistive technology for standing frames, those opportunities and the importance of those things. So looking at strength training and participation, here's an article that you can read that talks about reviewing the effectiveness of strength training in programs with people with cerebral palsy. There's a little research that's been conducted examining the effect of strength training on societal participation of people with CP. Participation was not measured in any of the 10 articles that were reviewed. However, it was reported anecdotally that a certain portion of the participants were more confident and would join some regular community exercise programs. Here's again the young man that we've seen a couple of times, and this young man in the wheelchair right here is at the same high school as the young man that we've seen previously a couple of times, and he's going to be my next wheelchair. He goes around the country doing wheelchair basketball now. Teacher again during PE class, which they're doing weightlifting. He's got him working on strengthening. And there's just scanning the room to show you that, you know, he's in a PE class with his peers. Training showed that there was significant improvements in dimensions D and E of the GMFM. In case you don't remember what dimensions D and E are, which I didn't without being reminded, these are the ones that measure activities such as standing alone, moving from sit to stand, walking, running, kicking, jumping.
Both arms, come on, I know you're tired. Both arms, I am the champion, yes.
Yeah, I was talking, he was saying he's the champion because he likes to get, I mean, one of the things that both his teacher and the PE teacher would do is they'd like to get him out of his wheelchair, and it was one of the reasons we practiced getting back in his wheelchair, because they would do a little wrestling session every day too, so he'd get some activity, and they always made it so that he could pin them. He pinned the teachers every day. So here's something I wanted to share with you guys. This is one of the one of the projects that was done in Iowa. We're looking at standing programs, and I'm going to get out of the slide program for just a second to bring up. This is just, I mean, right now it's in our Iowa resource book. It's not been shared publicly, but this was something that one of our AEAs did, our area education agencies, the Heartland AEA, and Jenny Palig came in and assisted them with that. And they were looking at birth to 21, and they were looking at standards and standing programs, and you know, looking at the considerations for standards in a school setting. Does it provide equal or better access to educational materials? Does it provide equal or better access to participation? Does it provide equal or better opportunity to work on IEP goals? Some of the things that needed to be taken into consideration, and considerations for use of standing programs at home. And then they did all sorts of research reviews into the, you know, why you might do a standing program. They looked at some of the barriers and some of the solutions. 2 standing programs. They looked at standing program considerations. These are nice little handouts that they produced, and this was just one of the projects. And then, you know, they have all the references to all of the material. So, you know, they looked at, what was it, 35 different research reviews and looked at their conclusions. And if we go back to the slide program, they came to consensus. They agree the standing program should start in children as young as 9 to 12 months of age when typical children are beginning to stand. We agree that standing in an abducted hip position should be considered for the hip health. That's something that not all standards, as you guys are well aware of, don't always accommodate an abducted hip position, but that actually puts more pressure into the hip joint and creates a better hip socket. We agree that the achievement of optimal health, a standard may be appropriate for children who is also using a walking device. And we agree that the use of the standard in the school setting is a team decision and should allow for equal or better access to the school instructional program and or allow for equal or better participation with peers. We agree that the use of the standard in the home setting is a family decision based on the input of the IFSP team and the medical community. And we agree that a children's participation with peers and activities when using a standing device is a key factor for long-term satisfaction. So they can't just put them in a standing device and have them, you know, in isolation working on something. They need to be with peers and working on activities with peers. Some of the benefits, we're going to be running out of time here, so I'm going to speed this up, but I mean, you can read it. Most of you guys are well aware of the benefits of the standing program. These were some of the things that they found in their program. You know, reduction of windswept deformity, all sorts of things that, you know, there was research to support. And then the AEA the following year looked at orthotics. So we're looking at some of those, you know, orange level interventions, and they did the very same thing. This is one of the things that makes me proud of being the lead therapist for the state of Iowa, because we have people that are just, I mean, they're willing to do the work and collectively get together and produce some of these documents. And we've got some amazing ones that we put together. But again, looking at that birth to 21 population and the evidence of orthotics, looking at consideration again of the use of orthotics. Does it give you better or equal or better access to educational material, equal or better access to participation, better opportunity to work on IEP goals, all of those kind of things that should be considered both in the home and using this basically the same format. And then looking at the benefits of orthotics and some of the research review, looking at the ankle joint, the knee joint, looking at gait, joint protection, and possible predictors, risk and possible contraindications to orthotics, and then some of the barriers, the non-compliance use, and what can we do for solutions, and looking at solutions, you know, parental education if there is a non-compliance, you know, looking at the expense, looking at possible resources, because obviously children outgrow orthotics, so they need to be replaced on a fairly regular basis, and donning and doffing the orthotics, and looking at problem solving and what can the student do themselves and what can't they do themselves, shoes and clothing and everything. And then some of the considerations, and again, looking at the research and what the research supports, and some alternatives to orthotics, and that's functional electrical stimulation, and it talks about the benefits of that and the risks and contraindications to the electrical stimulation, and then all of the research review that they did. So, I mean, as you want to look at orthotics and some of the conclusions that they came to in terms of orthotics, were AFOs typically improve step and stride length. This is from the research review. So this is some of their consensus statements that the Heartland AEA PTs came up with, that the selections of an orthotic is very individualized and based on the outcome needed and the child's diagnosis, that an orthotic can preserve joint integrity and improve bony alignment in the ankle and the knees, and that's the research-supported evidence. That the literature is inconclusive on the improvement in energy expenditure, range of motion, velocity, and function, that the functional electrical stim is a viable alternative, and that there's more quality research needs to be done in the use of orthotics with children with disabilities. So that's some of the consensus that they came to in terms of orthotics, which is why orthotics is in that, you know, a probably should do list. Here again is, and I'm speeding this along, some of the benefits of orthotics, which, I mean, you can look at this when you get a chance, or you can print off those the printouts that our AEAs have provided. The next one we looked at is looking at gait trainers, and this was done by one of our other AEAs. Again, looking at evidence-based considerations using basically the same format. They looked at gait trainers, and again, looking at that for the birth to 21 population, considerations in the school, considerations at home, looking at the evidence that supports the use of gait trainers and what it does for gross motor skill development, for neuromuscular, cardiovascular, or cardiorespiratory orthotics or orthopedics, and social or psychosocial implications, which is something we definitely need to take into consideration, and then some of the risks. And again, using that same format, they looked at some of the barriers, which are cost and time commitment and ease of use and transferring and motivation and things like that, and then looked at possible solutions to each of those barriers, using the gait trainer as an intervention and when to do that, and then their resource list and some of what they used. And then back to the slide presentation. Some of the conclusions that they came to is they agree that the overarching goal in the educating children with severe disabilities is promoting participation and independent movement. And we agree that the evidence currently is available suggests that the impact of using a gait trainer is positive, but no strong conclusions can be drawn due to lack of high-level evidence. And we agree the evidence suggests there are multiple benefits across many systems, the orthopedic, cardiorespiratory, GI, and social emotional. We agree that in addition to the medical-based benefits of using the gait trainer, there are also multiple social emotional benefits, including high-level interaction with peers, increased opportunity of self-advocacy, and more autonomous experience accessing their environment. And we agree that each child is unique, and there are multiple considerations in addressing when determining if a gait trainer is an appropriate intervention and what type will meet the child's needs. And the decisions to utilize the gait trainer is a team decision. And obviously, as physical therapists in school-based practice, we're part of all of this decision making, and need to be part of all of this decision-based making. So again, some of the benefits for gross motor skill development in the use of the gait trainer. And then here's just a quick slide that, remember, with all of our advanced degrees, our subsequent training, and no matter how smart we think we are, here's that young man that we saw with dystonia, and he had something to show me when I came to visit him. And he was very proud of himself. Something that he discovered all by himself. Obviously, he gets thirsty just like the other kids. He wanted to use the water fountain. He figured out a way to access the water fountain using his power wheelchair. So again, like I said, no matter how smart we think we are, and no matter how much training we have, sometimes our students are even smarter than we are. And I mean, they're the ones that are living with their conditions. And this is definitely truly context-focused therapy that I would not have thought of, but now as I have other children in power mobility that want access to a water fountain, I know at least one strategy or intervention that I might try with them in terms of a context-focused therapy approach. So here's an article that just came out in the most recent Pediatric Physical Therapy magazine, or at least not the most recent, the October version, and it just talked about a case study using dance intervention rather than traditional therapy. And it was a 15-year-old girl with a gross motor classification level 2, and she was participating in informal dance intervention twice a week. She had 60-minute sessions where they were focusing on waltzing and contra dancing and square dancing, and this is with a therapist who just decided she was going to do this and did the case study. And the informal dance instruction, the therapist had no dance training, so they used instructional videos and one-on-one or group settings. And the conclusion was, using this, that the waist circumference for this young lady decreased, the walking speed increased on the 6-minute walk test, the time up and down stairs time increased, the balance confidence increased, and the vestibular functioning improved per the different assessments you use. So, I mean, these are things that we can do that would be fun for our kids to do, and we can suggest. And even that young lady that I have that has spinal muscular atrophy that you saw in the Go Baby Go car, she is in a dance program too, and she loves it. She goes every Tuesday and takes part in that. So so here's one of the, another intervention that we can use that doesn't have to be done maybe at school, but it's something we can encourage families to do, or young adults, young or students to do outside of school, is looking at informal dance, because it decreases that, or combats that tendency for an increased sedentary lifestyle if we give them, something to work on and work towards. Here's the relationship to school-based physical therapy. And boy, I've got 5 minutes left here, so we're going to skip through here. This was done by Lisa Ciarello and Susan Efkin, and a lot of the big names in pediatric therapy and school-based therapy. They looked at activities that promoted posture and mobility and recreation and fitness. And this was actually, if you haven't connected with Seek Freaks, I recommend that you get in, that you look this up, www.seekfreaks.com. It was created by Lori Ray, the head of the school-based physical therapy special interest group, and Carlo Vialu. Their idea was to bring like-minded pediatric physical therapists and share evidence and rich information. And they're looking at professional growth and relentless. And one of their recent ones was a review of that article that we just, and it's all free. So, I mean, you talk about, giving access to all sorts of information and resources. They definitely are doing that. But one of the recent ones was the 6 takeaways from that article we just talked about. It was a review of that article that was by Ciarello and Efkin and et al. And some of the things I just wanted to conclude with this, but if you look at the things, establish, we're looking at interventions, establish more self-care goals. Self-care skills are predictive of post-school outcomes and further education, employment, or in outcomes of further education, employment, or independent living. The students need to be able to take care of their own needs. And you saw in the video that we showed that, I mean, there's a young man with pretty significant involvement who's taking care of a lot of his own self-care needs. Flip your practice, spend more time on self-care skills to work on the fundamental elements like posture and mobility. So working on real world tasks, and I think we showed this today, can promote frequent and specific practice using fundamental skills like posture and mobility? And do you think that these activities would also promote better fine motor communication and social skills? I think you saw that in some of what we showed today. Consult, collaborate, and listen. I mean, even if you just take an extra minute a week, by consulting, collaborating, we make our suggestions more salient to the needs and goals of parents and educators. This salience then translates into better carryover and more practice of our children. I mean, if we get everybody working on the same goals and, you know, for the same reasons, and everybody has a buy-in because they all have stake in what we're working on, we're going to get a lot better success. And I think we tried to show that today too. So, you know, that consultation, collaboration, and listening to all parties that are involved with the students we serve. Deliver strengthening and intervention within planned functional activities. Squats, boring and isolated, but pushing up with your legs on a seesaw is fun and participatory. You know, how can we embed our interventions into functional activities? Again, I think we showed that one student out on the playground and all of the opportunities that were available to him on the playground to work on not just motor planning, but balance and reaction and motor, and all sorts of motor skills and movement opportunities. And then 5, promote access to facilitate recreation, fitness, and recreation and fitness goals. So creating a better environmental access so that children and youth with disabilities can participate with their peers and promotes a lot more opportunities for practice and developing meaningful skills. And this needs to be done not just at school. You know, we can do that, I mean, by looking at, like I said in the presentation, I mean, recess and PE classes are excellent opportunities for this, but we also need to look outside of school, you know, for those recreational and fitness opportunities. We don't want our students to become sedentary. So we need to help promote those kind of interventions. And then last one, you know, align the student's goal to the curriculum. Learn the curriculum, you know, established in your state and within your school districts. Collaborate with your team and align with the goals of the curriculum. And the curriculum isn't just math, science, reading, history. The curriculum is everything the child needs, you know, to participate in school from the time that they you know, enter the bus in the morning to the time they exit the bus in the evening, and all of the things. I mean, that's all part of their curriculum. As we have said in Iowa, and I know some of our therapists in Iowa have heard me say in the past, you know, students are not coming to school to participate in physical therapy. They're getting physical therapy so they can participate in school. So that's our focus is in that participation in school so that they can be with their peers, you know, and do the activities that they're working on. You guys will all have access, and people that were there, the last one gave you guys access to our early intervention and school-based manual. I've got 2 minutes here left. I mean, that has sections on documentation. It has sections on standardized measures. These all have links so that you have and all sorts of research articles. Almost everything that was in this presentation today can be found under the supporting research in that manual. There's also the resource manual, has other resources, has handouts. Again, if you've not watched Zach Anner and the Quest for the Rainbow Bagel, it's a video that you can pull up on YouTube. I suggest anybody who wants to both be enlightened and get a great laugh, that's a great video to watch. We also in Iowa have a state PT and OT conference that we've run consecutively now for over 30 years. Some of our topics in the past have been the role of the PT and OT in serving students with complex disabilities. We had Cynthia Todd, who is one of the professors at the University of South Carolina, and this is definitely a specialty interest of hers. She came in, she talked about school-based therapy, assessment, intervention, and participation for students with complex disabilities. If you've not listened to Cynthia Brown Todd, I suggest that you get an opportunity to do that sometime. She is an excellent presenter and definitely passionate about working with children with complex disabilities. The year before that, we were looking at our role in enhancing participation, and our topic was participation as a means and an outcome, and we brought in Wendy Koster, who is pretty much famous. She's out of Boston University, and she's obviously famous for the school functional assessment and all of the research that she's done relative to making school access functional. Obviously, again, an excellent speaker. And then the year before that, we looked at our role in literacy development. We had Amy Schlesman come in, and she talked about building beyond books and physical therapy and closing the literacy achievement gap and some of the interventions we could do. And I couldn't get into nearly all of that kind of stuff that looks at interventions that we can use that also work on literacy. This year, we've got a conference coming up April 2nd and 3rd, and our focus is on our role in post-secondary transition, and we're bringing in people from the University of Oklahoma and the Zaro Center to talk about our role in preparing our students for that post-secondary transition. And we're bringing in a well-known occupational therapist to talk about the role of us specifically as PTs and OTs in preparing our students. And that's she's got the University of Oklahoma and Zaro Center have the first day, and Maria has the second day. So we got that going on. And then obviously I'm supposed to be promoting the Academy of Pediatric Physical Therapy. There are lots of benefits to being part of the physical therapy, the pediatric physical therapy community. They're all listed. A lot of them are listed right there. Here's some of the classes that are in that innovations. Opportunities to advocate in school-based physical therapy by Mary Jane Rappaport. Again, an excellent, passionate presenter. Evidence-based school practice, implications for literature and from literature in the PT Counts study. Susan Efkin, again out of the University of Kentucky, excellent presenter. Karen Tartik, the evaluation and interventions for students with autism spectrum disorder. Again, Karen has a son who is in the autism spectrum, so she lives what she's talking, and definitely passionate and a wonderful speaker and presenter. There's distance learning opportunities, treating children with complex disabilities. There's measuring outcomes. And if you haven't already done so, and you'd like to get a certificate of attendance and access to the PowerPoint and other things here, again, click on either that QR right there, or you can email me the same kind of information, your name, your email, email address, how many years you've been in school-based practice, what kind of practice you're doing, who you practice with, whether it's an AEA and an LEA, as the state practice, or whether you practice as a contracted service. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can send those to me. I would love any feedback. This is the last of our free, we've done 3 free presentations. This is the last of those 3 free ones. From now on, the presentations will be open to people that are members of the school-based SIG or the Academy of Pediatric Physical Therapy. The next one is scheduled for May 5th. I think it's a 7 o'clock Eastern time. And we've got Sandra, and I'll butcher her last name here, Sadvadra. And she's going to present on the segmental assessment of trunk control, the SATCO. She's one of the authors of a recently published article in the Pediatric PT Journal in June, and the dates to be determined. We're going to have Sue Searcy, and she's going to be presenting on the dosing of our interventions and support. And then there are at least 2 and maybe more webinars that are going to be planned again for the fall. And again, if you have any suggestions, any questions, please send them to me. send me, something, drop me a line, an email. Like I said, we as a group would, we would entertain any feedback, and if there are other things that you think, we need to be presenting on, please send suggestions for topics for things that we can present on. This has been the fastest 2 hours in my history. I've never talked this much or this fast, and we're now at the end. Again, there's some of my information, including my email, and you guys are free to run out of here as fast as you can and go get some ice cream or lunch or dinner or whatever you might do. I haven't had dinner yet, so I know I'm heading to get something to eat as soon as I'm done here. So thank you for all of your participation. Thank you for hanging in there for 2 hours. I hope you found it worth it. It looks like we have 158 participants. That's almost threefold any of our previous ones. So thank you again. And hopefully we'll see you guys all at the next presentation. Thank you. And good night.